The crimson sky of Xerion, 7 burned with the remnants of orbital bombardments, casting everything in an apocalyptic glow that made the battlefield look like the surface of hell itself. Sergeant Marcus Chun pressed himself against the twisted wreckage of what had once been a Terran Defense Force hover tank. His medikit clutched tightly against his chest as plasma fire streaked overhead in deadly arcs of superheated energy. 3 days. That's how long the siege had lasted, and the human forces were losing badly. The Zephyrian Empire's military machine had proven more devastating than anyone in high command had anticipated. Their bioengineered shock troops, towering insectoid creatures with razor-sharp claws and acid spit, had torn through the human defensive lines like paper. But it was their auxiliary forces that truly terrified the survivors, the Kithara. The wolf-like aliens stood nearly 8 feet tall, their muscular frames covered in thick, dark fur that seemed to absorb light itself. Their elongated muzzles were filled with teeth designed for tearing through armor plating, and their amber eyes held an intelligence that made them far more dangerous than any mere beast. They served as the Zephyrian Empire's scouts and close-quarter specialists, moving with a fluid grace that belied their massive size. Marcus had seen entire squads of Marines torn apart by just 3 or 4 Kithara warriors. The creatures fought with a savage efficiency, using both advanced energy weapons and their natural claws with equal deadly skill. They communicated through a series of growls and barks that somehow conveyed complex tactical information, coordinating their attacks with a precision that spoke of centuries of warfare experience. The medic's hands shook slightly as he checked his supplies. 7 stim packs remained, along with 3 emergency trauma pods and a handful of antiseptic patches. Not nearly enough for what lay ahead, but it would have to do. The evacuation shuttles had stopped coming 12 hours ago, leaving the scattered survivors to either fight their way to the emergency beacon site or die trying. A low whine echoed across the battlefield, and Marcus risked a glance around the edge of his cover. In the distance, he could see the massive form of a Zephyrian warwalker, its 6 legs carrying its bulbous body across the scarred landscape with mechanical precision. The creature's biomechanical weapons systems swept back and forth, searching for targets. Beneath it, smaller figures moved through the rubble, more of the insectoid shock troops, cleaning up any remaining human resistance. Marcus knew he should move. The rally point was still 3 kilometers away, through territory now firmly under enemy control. Every minute he delayed meant less chance of survival, less chance of reaching the other scattered members of his unit. But something held him in place, a nagging sense that he was forgetting something important. The sound came again, that same low whine he'd heard before, but closer now. It wasn't mechanical. It was organic pain. Someone was hurt. Every instinct screamed at him to ignore it. The Zephyrians and their allies gave no quarter to human survivors. They had demonstrated that repeatedly over the past 3 days, executing prisoners without hesitation. Getting involved would mean certain death, and his medical supplies were desperately needed by his own people. But Marcus Chun had taken an oath, years ago when he'd first donned the medic's cross, to heal the wounded, to preserve life wherever possible. The words had seemed simple then, straightforward. He'd never imagined they would be tested under circumstances like these. The whine came again, weaker this time. Dying. Marcus closed his eyes, cursed quietly, and began moving toward the sound. He kept low, using the abundant cover provided by destroyed vehicles and blast craters. The acrid smell of burned metal and something worse filled his nostrils, the battlefield stench that every combat medic learned to associate with death. Smoke drifted across his path in lazy tendrils, providing additional concealment, but making it harder to spot potential threats. The source of the sound lay in a crater roughly 50 meters from his original position. As Marcus approached the edge and peered down, his blood ran cold. A Kithara warrior lay at the bottom, its massive form crumpled against the rocky sides of the blast crater. Dark blood matted its fur, and one of its hind legs was bent at an unnatural angle. Shrapnel from some explosion had peppered its right side, leaving dozens of metal fragments embedded in the creature's hide. Marcus's first instinct was to back away slowly and pretend he'd never seen anything. This was the enemy. This creature and its kind had slaughtered hundreds of his fellow soldiers over the past few days. It would kill him without hesitation if given the chance. But as he watched, the Kithera's amber eyes opened and fixed on his position. There was no aggression in that gaze, no predatory calculation. Only pain, exhaustion, and something that looked remarkably like resignation. The creature was dying, and it knew it. The Kithera made no attempt to reach for the energy rifle that lay just beyond its grasp. It didn't growl or bare its teeth. It simply looked at Marcus with those impossibly expressive eyes and waited. Marcus found himself sliding down into the crater before he'd fully decided to move. His medical training was taking over, overriding the rational part of his brain that was screaming warnings about enemy contact. The Kithera watched his approach, but remained motionless, its breathing shallow and labored. Up close, the extent of the creature's injuries became apparent. The shrapnel wounds were the most obvious problem, but Marcus could see signs of internal bleeding as well. The way the Kithera held itself suggested broken ribs, and there was a deep gash along its left flank that would require immediate attention. "Easy," Marcus murmured, not sure if the creature could understand human speech, but hoping his tone would convey peaceful intentions. "I'm not going to hurt you." The Kithera's ears twitched at the sound of his voice, and its head tilted slightly. Up close, Marcus could see that its fur wasn't purely black as it had appeared from a distance. Instead, it was a deep charcoal color with subtle gray markings around the creature's muzzle and ears. Battle scars crisscrossed its visible hide, testament to a long career as a warrior. Marcus opened his medikit and pulled out a trauma scanner, a device roughly the size of his palm that could provide basic biological readings for most known species. The device had been programmed with data on various alien physiologies, including limited information about the Kithera. As he passed the scanner over the creature's torso, readings began appearing on the small screen. The results were worse than he'd feared. 3 broken ribs, severe internal bleeding, and what appeared to be a punctured lung. Without immediate medical intervention, the Kithera would be dead within the hour. Even with treatment, the chances of survival were questionable at best. Marcus looked into those amber eyes again, searching for some sign of what he should do. The Kithera was still watching him, but now there was something else in its expression. Curiosity, perhaps. It seemed amazed that a human would approach an enemy warrior, much less attempt to help. "This is insane," Marcus whispered to himself, but his hands were already moving. He pulled out one of his precious stim packs and loaded it into the injector. The combat stimulant would help stabilize the creature's vital signs long enough for him to work on the more serious injuries. The Kithera tensed as the needle pierced its hide, but it didn't try to pull away. Marcus could feel the creature's muscles bunching under his hands, ready to strike if this turned out to be some form of torture rather than treatment. But as the stimulant took effect and the pain began to recede, the Kithera gradually relaxed. Working quickly, Marcus began extracting the larger pieces of shrapnel. Each metal fragment that came free brought a fresh flow of dark blood, forcing him to use precious medical supplies to seal the wounds. The Kithera endured the procedure in silence, though Marcus could see the pain in its eyes. The worst injury was the deep gash along the creature's flank. It would require surgical thread to close properly, and Marcus wasn't sure his limited supplies were up to the task. But as he worked, something unexpected happened. The Kithera began to purr. It was a deep, rumbling sound that seemed to emerge from somewhere deep in the creature's chest. Marcus had heard cats purr before, but this was different, richer, more complex. There were harmonics in the sound that suggested some form of communication, though he couldn't begin to guess what it might mean. "You're welcome," he said softly, assuming it was some form of gratitude. As Marcus worked on closing the larger wounds, he became aware that the sounds of battle in the distance had changed. The plasma fire was more sporadic now, and He could hear the heavy footsteps of Zephyrian warwalkers moving away from their position. Either the human forces had been completely eliminated, or the enemy was regrouping for another push. Neither option was particularly encouraging. The Kithara seemed to sense the change as well. Its ears swiveled toward the distant sounds, and some of the tension returned to its posture. It began trying to push itself upright, but the effort sent fresh waves of pain through its injured frame. "Whoa, easy there," Marcus said, placing a gentle hand on the creature's shoulder. "You're not going anywhere for a while. Those ribs need time to heal." The Kithara looked at him for a long moment, then did something completely unexpected. It reached out with one massive paw and carefully touched Marcus's medikit. When he looked confused, the creature repeated the gesture, then pointed toward the distant sounds of battle. Understanding dawned slowly. The Kithara was telling him to go, to take his medical supplies, and help his own kind. It was releasing him from any obligation to continue treatment. "No," Marcus said firmly. "I'm not leaving until this is finished." The creature's amber eyes widened in what could only be surprise. It had clearly expected the human to abandon it as soon as the immediate crisis had passed. The concept of an enemy showing continued care seemed to genuinely shock it. Marcus spent the next hour working on the Kithara's injuries, using techniques he'd learned in field hospitals across a dozen different worlds. The creature proved to be a surprisingly cooperative patient, holding still during painful procedures and even helping to position itself for better access to various wounds. As he worked, Marcus found himself talking to the Kithara. It was an old habit, something he'd done with human patients to keep them calm during treatment. He told the creature about his training, about the worlds he'd served on, about the friends he'd lost during the siege. The Kithara listened intently, its ears tracking every word even though it probably couldn't understand the meaning. "You know," Marcus said as he applied a healing patch to the last of the shrapnel wounds, "when this war started, they told us you people were nothing but savage killers. Said the Kithara were basically animals that the Zephyrians had trained to use weapons." The Kithara's eyes narrowed slightly, and Marcus realized he might have touched on a sensitive subject. "But you're not, are you?" he continued. "I can see it in your eyes. There's someone in there, someone who thinks and feels and probably has a family somewhere waiting for them to come home." The creature made a soft sound, somewhere between a whine and a growl. It was a mournful noise filled with longing and sadness. Marcus didn't need a universal translator to understand what it meant. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know that feeling." As the immediate medical crisis passed, Marcus began to consider his situation more carefully. The Kithara was stable for now, but it would need several days of rest before it could move safely. Meanwhile, every moment they remained in the crater increased the chances of discovery by enemy forces. And if they were found, Marcus pushed that thought aside. He'd made his choice when he'd first entered the crater. Whatever happened next, he would deal with it as it came. The Kithara had been watching his face during this internal debate, and now it made another attempt to convince him to leave. It pointed toward what Marcus assumed was the enemy rally point, then toward the direction of the human evacuation zone. The message was clear: go to your people before it's too late. "I can't do that," Marcus said simply. "Not until you're strong enough to survive on your own." The creature stared at him for several long seconds, then slowly lowered its massive head until it was resting on its front paws. The gesture spoke of defeat, but also of acceptance. If the human was determined to stay, the Kithara would not argue further. Night fell quickly on Zirian 7, the planet's rapid rotation creating an almost strobe-like effect as the dying sun disappeared behind the mountain ranges. Marcus activated a small thermal blanket from his kit and carefully draped it over the Kithara's injured form. The creature's body temperature was running slightly below normal, probably a side effect of blood loss and shock. As darkness settled over the battlefield, new sounds emerged. The calls of scavenger creatures drawn by the smell of death, the occasional crack of cooling metal, and something else, distant howls that seemed to come from multiple directions at once. The Kithara's head shot up at the first howl, its ears rigid with attention. It listened intently as the calls continued, and Marcus could see something like hope flickering in its amber eyes. "Your people?" he asked quietly. The Kithara nodded once, a very human gesture that surprised Marcus. Then it did something even more unexpected. It threw back its head and released its own howl into the night, a long, mournful sound that seemed to carry impossible distances across the scarred landscape. The response came within seconds. Multiple voices answering from the darkness, growing closer with each exchange. The Kithara was calling its pack, and they were coming. Marcus felt his stomach drop. In his focus on treating the wounded creature, he had managed to forget one crucial fact. The Kithara were pack hunters. Where there was one, there were always others. And now those others were heading straight toward their position. The wounded Kithara seemed to sense his sudden fear. It looked at Marcus with an expression that might have been apologetic, then raised its head and howled again. This time, however, the sound was different. Instead of the long, carrying call it had used before, this was a series of short, sharp barks interspersed with quieter whines. The approaching howls changed in response, becoming more questioning, less aggressive. Whatever the wounded Kithara was telling them, it was having an effect on their approach. "I really hope you're telling them I'm a friend," Marcus muttered, checking to make sure his sidearm was still securely holstered. Not that it would do much good against a full pack of Kithara warriors, but it might buy him a few seconds if things went badly. The first of the approaching Kithara appeared at the edge of the crater roughly 20 minutes later. It was even larger than the wounded creature, its dark fur marked with intricate silver patterns that spoke of high rank within the pack hierarchy. This had to be the pack leader, the alpha that the others followed into battle. The alpha's amber eyes fixed on Marcus immediately, taking in every detail of his position and equipment. Those eyes held an intelligence that was both alien and disturbingly familiar, evaluating the human as both a potential threat and a puzzle to be solved. Marcus remained perfectly still, his hands clearly visible and empty of weapons. Any sudden movement now could trigger an attack that would end with his death in seconds. The wounded Kithara was still speaking in its language of barks and whines, apparently explaining the situation to its pack leader. More Kithara appeared around the crater's edge. Marcus counted at least 6, possibly more hidden in the darkness. Each one was a seasoned warrior, their hides marked with battle scars, and their equipment showing the wear of constant combat. They had come prepared for a fight, but now they waited for orders from their alpha. The pack leader studied the scene for another long moment, then did something that nearly stopped Marcus's heart. It leaped down into the crater, landing with surprising grace despite its massive size. The other Kithara immediately followed, surrounding Marcus and the wounded creature in a loose circle. Marcus fought, every instinct telling him to run. He was trapped now, completely at the mercy of creatures that could tear him apart without effort. But running would accomplish nothing except to trigger their hunting instincts. His only chance was to remain calm and hope that whatever the wounded Kithara had told him would be enough to spare his life. The Alpha approached slowly, its massive form radiating controlled power. It stopped just outside of arm's reach and began examining its injured pack member, sniffing at the wounds and the medical supplies Marcus had used. The creature's expression was unreadable, but Marcus could sense the intensity of its focus. After several minutes of inspection, the Alpha turned its attention to Marcus himself. It leaned forward, bringing its muzzle uncomfortably close to the human's face. Marcus could smell the creature's breath, could see his own reflection in those amber eyes. For a moment that stretched into eternity, predator and healer regarded each other in perfect silence. Then the Alpha did something that changed everything. It lowered its massive head in what was unmistakably a bow, a gesture of respect and gratitude that transcended species barriers. When it raised its head again, the aggression had vanished from its posture entirely. The other Kithara followed their leader's example, each one acknowledging Marcus with the same formal bow. The wounded creature managed to lift its head enough to participate in the gesture, and Marcus could see tears gathering in its amber eyes. "Well," Marcus said softly, his voice shaking with relief and exhaustion. "I guess that's settled then." The Kithra pack worked with an efficiency that both amazed and terrified Marcus. Within minutes of their arrival, they had transformed the blast crater into a defensible position. Two of the warriors disappeared into the darkness, returning with sections of armor plating and debris that they arranged to provide better cover from aerial surveillance. Others began setting up what appeared to be some form of early warning system, placing small devices around the crater's perimeter that would alert them to approaching threats. Marcus watched the activity with professional interest, noting how the pack coordinated without apparent verbal communication. Subtle changes in posture, brief eye contact, the positioning of ears and tail, all of these seemed to convey complex information between the Kithra. It was like observing a perfectly choreographed dance, each member knowing their role without needing explicit direction. The Alpha, whom Marcus had begun thinking of as the captain, approached him as the fortification work continued. In its massive paws, it carried what appeared to be a translation device, a small, crystalline artifact that pulsed with soft blue light. The creature activated the device and held it between them, then spoke in its native tongue of growls and barks. The device processed the sounds for several seconds before generating a synthetic human voice. "You heal Pack, brother." "Why?" The question was simple, but Marcus sensed that his answer would determine how the rest of this encounter played out. He considered his words carefully before responding. "Because he was hurt, and I had the ability to help. That's what medics do." The captain tilted its massive head, ears forward with interest. It spoke again, and the translator converted its words. "Enemy helps enemy? This is confusion-making." "Maybe we don't have to be enemies," Marcus suggested. "Maybe we're just people caught up in a war that neither of us wanted." The wounded Kithra, who had been listening intently to this exchange, made a series of soft sounds. The captain's ears swiveled toward its injured pack member, then back to Marcus. Whatever had been said seemed to surprise the Alpha considerably. "Pack brother says you show honor-debt behavior. Says you risk much danger for Stranger One. This is difficult to understand." Marcus was beginning to realize that the concept of helping an enemy was genuinely foreign to Kithra thinking. Their society was clearly built around pack loyalty and tribal identity. The idea that someone would risk their life for an outsider, especially an enemy outsider, simply didn't compute with their worldview. "Where I come from," Marcus explained, "we have a saying, first, do no harm. It means that sometimes helping others is more important than our differences." The captain was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Around them, the other pack members had completed their defensive preparations and were now settling into watch positions. Marcus noticed that despite their apparent acceptance of his presence, they were still maintaining a careful perimeter around him. Trust, it seemed, would have to be earned gradually. "You have pack name?" the captain finally asked. "Marcus. Marcus Chun." "Marcus Chun," the captain repeated slowly, working through the unfamiliar syllables. "I am Ragnar, hunt leader of the 9th Fong. Pack brother you heal is Voss, blade master, and my second command." Names. Such a simple thing, but Marcus understood the significance of the exchange. By sharing their names, the Kithra were acknowledging him as a person rather than simply an enemy. It was a first step towards something that might eventually become trust. "Honored to meet you, Ragnar," Marcus said, attempting what he hoped was an appropriately formal tone. Ragnar's ears twitched in what might have been amusement. "You speak with much politeness. This is unexpected from human pack." Over the next several hours, as Marcus continued monitoring Voss's condition, he found himself drawn into increasingly complex conversations with the Kithra pack. The translation device, while not perfect, was sophisticated enough to handle most concepts. What emerged was a picture of a species that was far more complex than the human military briefings had suggested. The Kithra were not, as human intelligence had claimed, simple-minded auxiliaries serving Zephyrian masters. They were a proud and ancient people with their own complex culture and social structures. Their alliance with the Zephyrian Empire was based on mutual benefit rather than subservience. The Kithra provided military expertise and ground combat capabilities, while the Zephyrians offered advanced technology and protection from other hostile species. Your people think we are slaves, Ragnar explained during one of their conversations. This is false thinking. We choose to fight because Zephyrian Pack offers good hunting and honor glory. But we are free to leave if hunt becomes without honor. In this war, Marcus asked, do you consider it honorable? Ragnar was quiet for a long time, his amber eyes reflecting the distant glow of fires still burning across the battlefield. When he finally answered, his tone was thoughtful rather than aggressive. War is war. Honor comes from how one fights, not from who one fights. Your people fight with much courage, even when facing defeat certain. This brings honor to both sides. Marcus found himself considering this perspective as he checked Voss's vital signs. The wounded Kithra was recovering well, his enhanced metabolism already beginning to repair the damage that would have killed a human. The broken ribs were knitting together, and the internal bleeding had stopped completely. Within another day or two, he would be mobile again. But mobility would bring its own problems. The pack couldn't remain in this crater indefinitely, and Marcus couldn't abandon his own people forever. Eventually, they would all have to return to their respective sides, and the temporary truce would end. As if reading his thoughts, Ragnar approached with the translator again. You think of return to human pack, yes? Marcus nodded. My people need me. There are others who might be wounded, waiting for help. And we must return to war duty, Ragnar agreed. But first, debt honor must be satisfied. I don't understand. Ragnar looked toward Voss, then back to Marcus. Voss lives because of your healing work. Pack owes life debt to Marcus Chun. This debt must be paid before we part ways. The concept of a life debt was apparently a serious matter in Kithra culture. Over the next hour, as the pack discussed the situation in their native tongue, Marcus began to understand the complexity of what had occurred. By saving Voss's life, he had created an obligation that the entire pack felt compelled to honor. They couldn't simply let him return to human lines without offering something in return. The debate among the Kithra was lengthy and sometimes heated, with different pack members advocating for various solutions. Some seemed to favor giving Marcus weapons or equipment. Others suggested providing intelligence about Zephyrian military positions. A few appear to be arguing for something more drastic, though the translation device couldn't quite capture the nuances of their proposals. Finally, Ragnar approached Marcus with what appeared to be their final decision. Pack chooses to offer great honor gift, he announced. We will escort Marcus Chun to human rally point. Safe passage through enemy territory. Marcus blinked in surprise. You would do that? Risk your own lives to get me back to my people. Life debt demands balance, Ragnar said simply. You risk danger for Pack Brother. We risk danger for you. This is proper way. The magnitude of what they were offering began to sink in. The journey to the human rally point would take them through territory controlled by Zephyrian forces. If they were discovered escorting a human, the Kithra pack would be branded as traitors. They would face execution or worse if caught. I can't ask you to do that, Marcus protested. The risk is too great. Voss, who had been listening to the conversation, struggled to lift his head. He spoke briefly in the Kithra language, his tone firm despite his weakened condition. Pack Brother says debt is debt, Ragnar translated. Honor demands payment, regardless of danger cost. To refuse would be insult great to Pack honor. Marcus realized he was trapped by the very alien cultural concepts he was beginning to understand. The Kithra genuinely felt obligated to repay what they saw as a life debt, and refusing their offer would be interpreted as a grave insult. But accepting it would put them all at enormous risk. There might be another way, he said slowly, an idea beginning to form. What if instead of escorting me to my people, you help me help others? There might be more wounded humans out there, scattered across the battlefield. If we could find them, treat their injuries. The pack exchanged glances, clearly intrigued by this alternative. Ragnar's ears were forward with interest as he considered the proposal. You suggest healing mission? To find and aid wounded human warriors. Exactly. It would satisfy your debt of honor, while also serving a humanitarian purpose. And it might be less risky than trying to penetrate Zephyrian lines. The Kithara discussed this new proposal extensively. Marcus could see that it appealed to them on multiple levels. It offered a way to honor their obligation, while also demonstrating the kind of battle courage their culture valued. The idea of actively seeking out dangerous situations in order to help others seemed to resonate with their warrior mentality. Pack agrees to healing mission, Ragnar announced finally. We will search battlefield for wounded human fighters. Marcus will provide healing work. Pack will provide protection and transport. And so an unlikely partnership was born. Over the next 18 hours, as Voss continued to recover from his injuries, Marcus found himself being inducted into the operational structure of a Kithra war pack. The creatures shared their rations with him, a protein-rich paste that tasted better than he'd expected. They taught him basic hand signals for silent communication during operations. They even modified a piece of their equipment to serve as a harness that would allow him to keep up with their enhanced movement speed. The first rescue mission began just before dawn on the fourth day after the siege had begun. The pack moved through the battlefield with the fluid grace Marcus had observed before, using cover and concealment with an expertise that impressed even his combat-trained eyes. They communicated through subtle gestures and occasional soft vocalizations, coordinating their movement with precision that spoke of years of practice. Marcus rode on Ragnar's back, secured by the improvised harness they had created. The sensation was both thrilling and terrifying. The Kithara pack leader could cover ground at speeds that would have been impossible for a human on foot, leaping across obstacles and navigating through debris with seemingly effortless grace. They found their first survivor in the wreckage of a supply depot roughly 2 kilometers from their starting point. Private Jenkins had been trapped under a collapsed beam for the better part of 2 days, his legs crushed and his water supply exhausted. He was delirious with pain and dehydration when Marcus reached him, barely conscious enough to register what was happening. The Kithara pack took up defensive positions around the wreckage while Marcus worked. Extracting Jenkins from the debris required careful coordination. The pack members used their enhanced strength to lift the beam while Marcus pulled the wounded soldier clear. The private's injuries were severe, but treatable, requiring 2 of Marcus's remaining stim packs and most of his surgical supplies. As Marcus worked, he became aware that Jenkins was staring at the Kithara pack with a mixture of terror and confusion. The private's eyes kept darting between his human rescuer and the alien warriors standing guard around them. Easy, Jenkins, Marcus said quietly. They're here to help. I know it doesn't make sense, but they're on our side for now. Kithara, Jenkins whispered, his voice cracked from dehydration. But they're the enemy. Enemy is relative, Marcus replied, borrowing a phrase he'd heard Ragnar use. Right now, they're the only reason you're still alive. Jenkins's condition stabilized within an hour, but he would need proper medical facilities to fully recover from his injuries. The pack couldn't carry him to the human rally point without exposing themselves to significant risk, so they improvised a different solution. Using salvaged materials from the depot, they constructed a basic shelter and supplied it with emergency rations and medical supplies. Jenkins would be safe there until human rescue teams could locate him, assuming any were still operational. Ragnar left one of the pack's emergency beacons with the injured soldier, set to broadcast on human frequencies. Your people will find you, Ragnar assured Jenkins through the translator. Stay hidden. Stay quiet. Help will come. Jenkins nodded weakly, still clearly struggling to process the situation. As they prepared to leave, he grabbed Marcus's arm with surprising strength. Why, he asked. Why are they helping us? Marcus looked at the Kithara pack, these alien warriors who had risked everything to honor a debt they saw as sacred. Because some things are more important than war, he said finally. Some things transcend the boundaries we create between us and them. The second rescue came 6 hours later, deep in what had once been the human command sector. They found Lieutenant Sarah Morrison and two of her communications specialists holed up in a bombed-out building, low on ammunition and surrounded by Zephyrian patrol drones. The rescue required the pack to engage in actual combat for the first time since forming their alliance with Marcus. Watching the Kithara fight was like observing poetry in motion. They moved with a coordination that seemed almost telepathic, each member anticipating the other's actions with uncanny precision. Their weapons, a combination of energy rifles and traditional bladed weapons, were wielded with deadly efficiency. The Zephyrian drones, sophisticated as they were, proved no match for the pack's combined assault. In less than 10 minutes, the threat had been eliminated, and Marcus was treating Morrison's injuries, shrapnel wounds, and a concussion from the building's partial collapse. The lieutenant was more accepting of her unusual rescuers than Jenkins had been, perhaps because she'd witnessed their combat effectiveness firsthand. "I've been monitoring Zephyrian communications," Morrison told Marcus as he worked. "There's something you should know. High Command has authorized a strategic withdrawal. All remaining human forces are being pulled back to the orbital platforms. The evacuation shuttles resume operation at 0600 tomorrow, but only for 12 hours. The implications of this news hit Marcus like a physical blow. If the human forces were withdrawing completely, then any survivors left on the surface would be abandoned. The wounded soldiers they'd rescued, the scattered survivors still hiding throughout the battlefield, they would all be left to die." Ragnar had been monitoring the conversation through his translator, and Marcus could see the concern in the pack leader's amber eyes. "This troubles you greatly," the Kithara observed. "My people are leaving," Marcus explained. "Anyone we don't find and evacuate in the next 18 hours will be stranded here permanently." The pack exchanged glances, communicating through their subtle gestural language. Marcus could sense the weight of decision settling over them. They had honored their life debt to him personally, but this situation was asking for something far greater. "How many wounded humans remain on battlefield?" Ragnar asked finally. Morrison consulted the data pad she'd salvaged from her communications equipment. "Difficult to say for certain. Maybe 20, possibly 30 scattered survivors. Most are injured or trapped. 18 human hours to find all and bring to evacuation site," Ragnar mused. "This is a significant challenge." Marcus looked at each of the pack members in turn, seeing the same determination reflected in their amber eyes. These weren't his people, weren't even his species. They owed him nothing beyond what they had already given. But he could see that they understood the moral weight of the situation as clearly as he did. "Pack chooses to extend hunting mission," Ragnar announced. "We will find all wounded human warriors. We will see them safely to evacuation ships. This is new debt we choose to take upon ourselves." "But why?" Morrison asked, echoing Jenkins's earlier question. "You're risking everything for people you don't even know." Ragnar was quiet for a moment, considering his response. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of profound conviction. Marcus showed Pack Brother mercy when mercy was not expected, showed honor when honor was not required. This teaches us that honor is not bounded by pack lines or species lines. Honor is choice. We choose honor. And with that declaration, the real mission began. What followed was 18 hours of the most intensive search and rescue operation Marcus had ever participated in. The Kithara pack split into smaller groups, covering more ground while maintaining communication through their sophisticated equipment network. Marcus rode with different pack members throughout the operation, his medical skills in constant demand as they located survivor after survivor. They found Corporal Davis trapped in an overturned APC, both legs broken, but still trying to operate his radio. They discovered Specialist Kim hiding in a drainage culvert, suffering from severe burns but refusing to give up her watch position. They located Sergeant Torres barely alive under the rubble of a collapsed bunker, kept breathing by sheer determination, and the emergency oxygen tank he'd managed to keep functional. Each rescue brought new challenges and new risks. Zephyrian patrols were increasing as the alien forces consolidated their control over the battlefield. Several times the pack had to engage enemy units to protect Marcus while he worked, and their ammunition supplies were running dangerously low. But they persevered, driven by a shared sense of purpose that transcended species barriers. The wounded humans, initially shocked by their alien rescuers, gradually came to trust and even admire the Kithara warriors. Stories began to spread among the survivors. Tales of alien warriors who risked their lives to save human strangers, of a medic who had bridged the gap between species through simple compassion. As dawn approached on the final day, they had located 27 survivors and established a secure evacuation site in the ruins of the original human command post. The Kithara pack had taken casualties of their own during the operation, 2 wounded, though not seriously, and all of them exhausted from the extended mission. Marcus stood on an elevated position overlooking their makeshift camp, watching the wounded humans rest under the protection of their unlikely guardians. In the distance, he could see the first evacuation shuttles beginning their descent from orbit, coming to collect the survivors and carry them to safety. "Dead is satisfied?" Ragnar asked, approaching with his translator. Marcus turned to face the pack leader, this alien warrior who had become something far more than an ally over the past few days. "More than satisfied. What you've done here, there aren't words for it." "Then, we understand each other," Marcus Chun of the human pack, Ragnar said. "Perhaps this war has taught us something valuable about the nature of honor." As the evacuation shuttles touched down and began loading the wounded survivors, Marcus realized that something fundamental had changed. The war between humans and the Zephyrian Empire would continue, and the Kithara would likely return to fighting alongside their allies. But the seeds of something greater had been planted on this battlefield, watered with blood and sacrifice and the simple recognition that honor transcended species boundaries. The question now was whether those seeds would be allowed to grow or whether they would be crushed beneath the weight of continuing conflict. The evacuation shuttles created a thunderous symphony as they lifted off from Zirian 7, their engines fighting against the planet's gravity well to carry the rescued survivors to safety. Marcus watched from the loading bay of the final transport, his heart heavy with the knowledge that this might be the last time he saw Ragnar and the 9th Fong pack. The Kithara warriors stood at the edge of the landing zone, their massive forms silhouetted against the burning remains of the battlefield. They had chosen not to approach the shuttles directly, understanding that their presence might create complications for Marcus and the other human survivors. Instead, they maintained their distance, offering a final salute to the humans they had helped rescue. Lieutenant Morrison, who was sharing Marcus's transport despite her injuries being relatively minor, followed his gaze toward the alien figures. "Strange to think that 48 hours ago, I would have been calling in airstrikes on them," she mused. "War makes enemies of natural allies," Marcus replied, repeating something Ragnar had said during one of their conversations. "Maybe peace will make allies of natural enemies." The shuttle's communication array crackled to life as they achieved orbital altitude. "All evacuation units, this is Fleet Command. Report mission status and passenger manifests for debriefing." Marcus listened with growing unease as the various shuttle commanders reported their loads. 27 rescued survivors, including several who would have died without immediate medical intervention. By any measure, the mission had been an overwhelming success. But he knew that the official reports would focus on numbers and statistics, not on the extraordinary circumstances that had made the rescues possible. "Transport 7, this is Fleet Command. Your manifest shows Medic Sergeant Marcus Chun aboard. Is that correct?" Morrison activated the shuttle's communication system. "Confirmed, Fleet Command. Sergeant Chun was instrumental in locating and treating the survivors. Recommend immediate commendation for extraordinary service under fire." "Copy that. Transport 7. Sergeant Chun is to report directly to Intelligence Division upon arrival. Priority debrief scheduled." Marcus felt his stomach drop. Intelligence Division meant interrogation, meant questions about how he had survived alone on the battlefield for so long, about how he had managed to locate so many scattered survivors. Eventually, those questions would lead to the truth about the Kithera pack, and that truth could have far-reaching consequences. The journey to the orbital platform took 40 minutes, during which Marcus tried to prepare himself for what was coming. The survivors he had helped rescue would undoubtedly be questioned as well, and their stories would corroborate his presence at multiple rescue sites across the battlefield. Intelligence would want to know how one medic had managed to cover so much ground in such hostile territory. The answers to those questions would inevitably lead to discussions about the Kithera pack and their unprecedented cooperation in saving human lives. Marcus knew that such information could be used in ways that might endanger Ragnar and his warriors. The pack had risked everything to honor what they saw as a debt of honor, and Marcus felt a responsibility to protect them from the consequences of their compassion. Captain Reynolds, the Intelligence Division's senior interrogator, was waiting for Marcus when the shuttle docked. Reynolds was a thin, sharp-featured man with the kind of cold eyes that seemed to catalog every detail for future analysis. He gestured for Marcus to follow him toward a secure briefing room without bothering with pleasantries. Sergeant Chun, Reynolds began once they were seated in the sterile environment of the interrogation chamber. Your survival and actions on Zirian 7 have raised some interesting questions. According to the preliminary reports from the survivors you rescued, you somehow managed to locate and treat 27 scattered personnel across roughly 50 square kilometers of enemy-controlled territory, all within an 18-hour time frame. Marcus had spent the shuttle journey preparing for this moment. I was fortunate, sir. Good intel from the survivors I found early on, plus some educated guessing about where people might take shelter. Reynolds consulted his data pad, his expression skeptical. Lieutenant Morrison reports that you appeared at her position with detailed knowledge of Zephyrian patrol patterns. Corporal Davis states that you seem to anticipate enemy movement with unusual accuracy. Several other survivors have made similar observations. Combat experience, sir. After 3 days on the battlefield, you start to recognize patterns in enemy behavior. Indeed, Reynolds made a note on his pad. Tell me, Sergeant, during your time on the surface, did you encounter any unusual assistance? Any unexpected factors that might have contributed to your success? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Marcus could see that Reynolds suspected something, though he might not know exactly what. The survivor stories had apparently raised red flags, suggesting capabilities that exceeded what one medic should have been able to accomplish alone. Good luck, sir. Right place at the right time, most occasions. Reynolds studied Marcus for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Sergeant, I'm going to be direct with you. The pattern of your movements across the battlefield suggests coordination with some external force. Satellite imagery shows heat signatures that don't match known human or Zephyrian units in the areas where you conducted your rescues. We need to know what you're not telling us. Marcus felt sweat beading on his forehead despite the chamber's controlled climate. Reynolds was closer to the truth than he'd hoped, and continued denial might only make things worse. But revealing the full story could endanger the very people who had saved his life and the lives of 27 other humans. Sir, if I may ask, what would happen to any external forces that might have been involved in the rescue operations? Reynolds's eyes narrowed with interest. That would depend entirely on the nature of their involvement and their current allegiances. Why do you ask? Marcus took a deep breath, making a decision that would either protect his alien allies or condemn them. Because, sir, I believe that any forces that risk their lives to save human soldiers deserve consideration, regardless of their official status in this conflict. Sergeant Chun, Reynolds said slowly, are you telling me that you received assistance from enemy forces during your rescue operations? The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus looked directly into Reynolds's cold eyes and chose his words carefully. I'm telling you, sir, that sometimes the definitions of enemy and ally can be more complicated than our briefing materials suggest. Over the next 3 hours, Marcus provided a carefully edited version of his experiences on Zirian 7. He described encountering wounded Kithera warrior Voss, his decision to provide medical treatment, and the subsequent arrival of the Ninth Fong Pack. He explained their concept of life debt and their decision to assist in the rescue operations, emphasizing their honorable conduct throughout the extended mission. Reynolds listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. His expression shifted from skepticism to surprise to something approaching fascination as the story unfolded. When Marcus finished his account, the intelligence officer sat in silence for several minutes, processing the implications of what he'd heard. "This is unprecedented," Reynolds finally said. "We have no previous records of Kithra forces providing assistance to human personnel. Their cultural framework, as we understand it, should have made such cooperation impossible. Maybe our understanding of their culture has been incomplete, sir." "Perhaps." Reynolds made extensive notes on his datapad, clearly preparing for a longer chain of reports and analysis. "Sergeant, I need to stress the classified nature of this information. Until we can determine the broader implications, this incident remains compartmentalized at the highest levels." "Understood, sir. But I want to make one thing clear. The Kithra Pack save human lives at considerable risk to themselves. Whatever decisions are made about this information, I hope that fact will be given appropriate weight." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "Your concern is noted, Sergeant." Dismissed. Marcus left the interrogation chamber with mixed feelings. He had protected the Ninth Fong Pack's identity to some degree, but he knew that Intelligence Division would want more information. Satellite tracking, communication intercepts, and analysis of the survivors' testimonies would eventually piece together a more complete picture of what had occurred on the battlefield. The question now was what the human military would do with that information. Marcus spent the next several days in the medical bay of the orbital platform, treating the survivors they had rescued and undergoing his own physical and psychological evaluations. The wounded humans were recovering well, thanks in large part to the rapid treatment they had received on the battlefield. Several had expressed curiosity about their unusual rescuers, but Marcus deflected most questions with references to the classified nature of the operation. On the fourth day after his debriefing, Marcus received an unexpected visitor. Admiral Sarah Zhang, commander of the human fleet in this sector, appeared in the medical bay without fanfare or security detail. Her presence immediately attracted attention from the medical staff, but she gestured for them to continue with their duties. "Sergeant Shun," she said, approaching his workstation, "I understand you've had an interesting few days." Marcus straightened to attention. "Yes, ma'am. Just doing my job, Admiral." Zhang smiled, an expression that transformed her normally stern features. "Captain Reynolds has briefed me on your situation. What you accomplished on that battlefield, what you and your allies accomplished, has implications that extend far beyond this single conflict. Mom, walk with me, Sergeant." They left the medical bay and made their way to one of the platform's observation decks, where massive windows provided a view of the planet below. Zirian 7 looked peaceful from this distance, its scarred surface hidden by atmospheric haze and the beauty of natural weather patterns. "Sergeant," Admiral Zhang began, "what would you say if I told you that your actions on that battlefield might have opened a door that could change the nature of this war?" Marcus considered the question carefully. "I'd say that I hope any changes would be for the better, ma'am. I've seen enough death to know that there has to be a better way. Intelligence has been analyzing the communication intercept from the Kithra Pack you worked with. Did you know that they sent reports back to their command structure describing your actions?" Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. "No, ma'am. I wasn't aware of that. Those reports have caused quite a stir in Kithra military circles. Apparently, the concept of an enemy showing mercy and honor to wounded warriors has no precedent in their historical records. It's generated significant debate within their leadership about the nature of this conflict." Admiral Zhang activated a holographic display that showed recent intelligence data. "We've detected unusual communication patterns between various Kithra packs, increased discussions about honor codes, and warrior ethics. Your medic friend Voss has apparently become something of a celebrity among their people, living proof that humans are capable of behavior they previously thought impossible." "What does that mean for the war, ma'am?" "We don't know yet, but 3 days ago, we received something we never expected, a formal communication from the Kithara High Council, requesting a meeting under traditional honor parley protocols. They want to discuss what they're calling new understanding of human warrior nature. Marcus stared at the Admiral in amazement. They want to negotiate? They want to talk, Jean corrected, which is more than they've been willing to do since this conflict began. The question is whether we're prepared to listen. The implications of this development were staggering. If the Kithara were genuinely interested in dialogue, it could represent the first crack in the Zephyrian Empire's united front. The wolf-like aliens were respected throughout the galaxy for their warrior culture and their unwavering honor codes. If they withdrew their support from the Zephyrian cause, it could shift the balance of the entire war. Sergeant, Admiral Jean continued, I'm going to ask something unusual of you. The Kithara have specifically requested that you be present at any honor parley negotiations. They consider you to be what they call a truth speaker, someone whose word carries special weight in matters of honor. Marcus felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Ma'am, I'm just a combat medic. I don't have any training in diplomacy or interspecies relations. No, but you have something more valuable, credibility with both sides. The humans respect you for your service and sacrifice. The Kithara respect you for your honor and compassion. That kind of trust can't be manufactured or trained. It has to be earned. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the planet slowly rotate beneath them. Marcus thought about Ragnar and the Ninth Fong Pack, about the risks they had taken to honor what they saw as a sacred debt. He thought about the wounded survivors who had been pulled from the battlefield, given a second chance at life because alien warriors had chosen honor over easy victory. If I agree to participate in these negotiations, Marcus said finally, I want certain guarantees. The Kithara pack that helped me, they need to be protected. What they did could be seen as treason by their own people or by the Zephyrians. I won't be part of any process that puts them at risk. Admiral Zhang nodded approvingly. Captain Reynolds mentioned your concern for your allies. That kind of loyalty is exactly why the Kithara trust you. And yes, protection for the Ninth Fong Pack will be part of any agreement we reach. Then, I'll do whatever I can to help, ma'am. Excellent. The preliminary meeting is scheduled for next week on a neutral station in the Gamma Sector. You'll be part of the human delegation with full diplomatic status and protection. As Admiral Zhang prepared to leave, she paused and looked back at Marcus. Sergeant, I want you to understand something. What happened on Zirian 7, what you and that Kithara pack accomplished together, it represents hope. For the first time since this war began, we have proof that our species can find common ground, that we can work together towards shared goals. I hope you're right, ma'am. So do I, Sergeant. So do I. The week that followed was a whirlwind of preparation and briefings. Marcus found himself studying Kithara culture and history, learning about their honor codes and social structures. He met with diplomats, military strategists, and xenobiologists, all trying to prepare him for what might be an unprecedented encounter between species. But despite all the preparation, Marcus knew that the real test would come when he faced Ragnar and the other Kithara representatives. Would the bonds forged on the battlefield survive the complex realities of interstellar politics? Could the simple act of medical compassion really serve as the foundation for lasting peace between species? As his transport approached the neutral station where the negotiations would take place, Marcus reflected on the journey that had brought him to this moment. A few weeks ago, he had been a simple combat medic focused on saving lives and surviving another day in an increasingly brutal war. Now he found himself at the center of diplomatic efforts that could reshape the galaxy. The irony wasn't lost on him that it had all started with a wounded alien warrior lying in a blast crater and a simple decision to do what medics do: heal the hurt, regardless of who they might be. Sometimes, Marcus thought, the most profound changes begin with the smallest acts of compassion. The neutral station appeared on the transport's view screen, a gleaming structure of metal and energy fields floating in the emptiness between stars. Somewhere aboard that station, Kithra representatives were waiting, ready to discuss possibilities that neither species had dared to imagine just days before. Marcus checked his equipment one final time, ensuring that his medical kit was complete and his dress uniform was properly arranged. Whatever happened in the negotiations ahead, he wanted to represent both his own people and the principles that had brought him to this moment with appropriate dignity. The docking bay doors opened with a soft hiss of equalizing atmosphere, and Marcus stepped forward to meet whatever destiny awaited him among the stars. Behind him lay a battlefield where enemies had become allies through shared sacrifice and mutual respect. Ahead lay the possibility that such transformation could spread beyond the bounds of war to encompass the broader relationship between their species. It was, he reflected, a responsibility worthy of the trust that both humans and Kithra had placed in him. The question now was whether he would prove equal to the challenge of turning battlefield compassion into lasting peace. The neutral station's main conference chamber was a masterpiece of diplomatic architecture, designed to accommodate multiple species while avoiding any symbols or arrangements that might suggest favoritism. The round table at its center had been crafted from materials native to neither human nor Kithra worlds, and the lighting had been calibrated to work optimally for both species' visual systems. Marcus entered the chamber as part of the human delegation, feeling somewhat out of place among the seasoned diplomats and senior military officers who comprised the rest of the team. His combat medic uniform had been replaced with formal diplomatic attire, but he still carried his medical kit, both as a symbol of his role and as a practical necessity, given the uncertainty surrounding the negotiations. Admiral Zhang led the human contingent, her composed demeanor betraying none of the tension that Marcus could sense radiating from the entire group. This was uncharted territory for everyone involved. Humans and Kithra had been enemies for over a decade, with communication limited to weapons fire and tactical maneuvering. The idea of sitting down for formal negotiations seemed almost surreal. The Kithra delegation entered through the chamber's opposite door, and Marcus felt his breath catch as he recognized the familiar figure leading them. Ragnar moved with the same fluid grace Marcus remembered from the battlefield, but now the pack leader wore what appeared to be ceremonial armor, polished metal plates inscribed with intricate patterns that probably told the story of his pack's achievements and honor. Behind Ragnar came 4 other Kithra, each bearing the distinctive markings of high rank within their society. But it was the final member of their delegation that surprised Marcus most. Voss, the wounded warrior he had treated in that crater on Zirian 7, walked with only a slight limp to show for his injuries. The Blade Master's amber eyes found Marcus immediately, and the Kithra offered a subtle nod of recognition. The formal introductions were conducted through a more sophisticated translation system than the field device Ragnar had used on the battlefield. Each species presented their credentials and stated their authority to negotiate, following protocols that had been established through careful diplomatic preparation. I am Admiral Sarah Zhang, speaking for the Terran Defense Force and the United Earth Government, the human commander announced. We come seeking understanding and the possibility of peace between our peoples. I am Ragnar, hunt leader of the 9th Fong, and speaker for the Kithra High Council, came the translated response. We come seeking truth knowledge about human honor and the nature of this conflict between us. The opening formalities took nearly an hour, with both sides carefully establishing the boundaries and expectations for their discussions. Marcus listened intently, beginning to understand the complex cultural underpinnings that would shape everything they discussed. For the Kithra, this wasn't simply a military or political negotiation. It was a fundamental examination of honor, truth, and the warrior code that defined their society. When the formal presentations concluded, Ragnar's amber eyes fixed on Marcus with unmistakable intensity. The Kithra delegation recognizes Marcus Chun, truth speaker, and honor debt holder. We request his voice be heard in these discussions, as his words carry the weight of proven honor. Admiral Zhang nodded to Marcus, indicating that he should respond. Rising from his seat, Marcus felt the weight of both delegations' attention settling upon him. Everything he said now would be analyzed for meaning and implication, potentially affecting the course of interstellar relations. I am honored by the recognition of the Kithra delegation, he began, his voice steady despite his inner nervousness. I speak not as a diplomat or strategist, but as someone who has witnessed the capacity for honor and compassion that exists in both our species. What happened on Zirian 7 proved that we're more alike than our differences might suggest. The lead Kithra diplomat, introduced as High Pack Master Corvain, leaned forward with interest. You speak of similarities between human pack and Kithra pack, yet our species have fought for many cycles, with much blood spilled on both sides. What similarities can exist between warriors who have been enemies so long? Marcus chose his words carefully, knowing that his answer would set the tone for everything that followed. Honor, courage, loyalty to one's people, and the willingness to risk everything to protect those who cannot protect themselves. These are not human traits or Kithra traits. They are warrior traits shared by all who truly understand what it means to serve something greater than themselves. The Kithra delegation exchanged glances, their subtle gestural communication suggesting intense discussion. Finally, Corvain spoke again. You claim warriors of both species share these traits. Yet human forces have shown tactical behaviors that suggest dishonor, attacks on supply convoys, targeting of medical facilities, use of weapons designed to cause maximum suffering rather than clean death. Admiral Zhang started to respond, but Marcus held up a hand, requesting permission to address the accusation himself. The admiral hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. High Pack Master Corvain speaks truth about some human military actions, Marcus acknowledged, causing several members of the human delegation to shift uncomfortably. But I would ask, have all Kithra actions in this war been honorable? Have there been no instances where your warriors chose expedience over honor, victory over virtue? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Marcus could see that he was walking a dangerous line. But he also sensed that the Kithra respected directness, and that any attempt at diplomatic evasion would undermine his credibility with them. Voss spoke for the first time since entering the chamber, his words translated with careful precision. The true speaker shows wisdom in his question. War corrupts all who participate in it, regardless of species. The question is not whether dishonor has occurred, but whether honor can be reclaimed and preserved in what comes after. This acknowledgement seemed to surprise both delegations. The humans hadn't expected the Kithra to admit to any questionable actions, while the Kithra appeared impressed by Marcus's willingness to criticize his own people in the interest of truth. Over the next several hours, the discussions delved deeper into the fundamental causes of the conflict between their species. What emerged was a picture of misunderstanding and miscommunication that had escalated into open warfare through a series of tragic mistakes and cultural misinterpretations. The Kithra had originally encountered human colonists on a disputed world, where their traditional hunting rights conflicted with human agricultural development. What should have been a simple territorial negotiation had been complicated by communication barriers and cultural assumptions. The humans had interpreted Kithra hunting practices as aggressive encroachment, while the Kithra had viewed human agricultural expansion as disrespectful destruction of sacred hunting grounds. The first bloodshed came from fear, Ragnar admitted through the translator. Human settlers attacked a Kithra hunting party, believing them to be raiders. The pack fought back as honor demanded, but they sought only to escape, not to kill. Yet 3 humans died in that encounter. Admiral Zhang consulted her historical records. Our reports from that incident describe it as an unprovoked attack on peaceful colonists. The survivors claimed the Kithra forces were attempting to capture or kill civilians. Fear changes perception, Marcus observed. Both sides saw threat where none was intended, and responded with the tools they understood, violence. But neither side bothered to learn the truth before escalating the conflict. The revelation that the decade-long war had its origins in such a fundamental misunderstanding was sobering for both delegations. Millions had died. Entire worlds had been devastated, all because two species had failed to establish meaningful communication when it might have prevented catastrophe. As the day wore on, Marcus found himself serving as an informal mediator between the two sides. His unique position, trusted by both humans and Kithra, yet beholden to neither diplomatic establishment, allowed him to ask difficult questions and offer perspectives that the official negotiators couldn't. "The question we need to address," he said during one particularly tense exchange, "is not what happened in the past, but what we can build for the future. Both our species have proven capable of honor and courage. Both have also proven capable of terrible mistakes. The question is whether we are wise enough to learn from those mistakes." High Packmaster Corvain regarded Marcus with something approaching respect. "You speak with much wisdom for one, so young in cycles. But wisdom and action are different things. How does one build trust between species that have been enemies for so long?" Before Marcus could respond, an alarm began sounding throughout the station. The conference chamber's communication system activated, and the voice of the station commander filled the room with urgent news. "All delegations, this is Commander Torres. We have incoming ships on an intercept course, Zephyrian Empire vessels, including at least 2 heavy cruisers. They'll be in weapons range within 30 minutes. The effect of this announcement was immediate and dramatic. The human delegation began discussing evacuation procedures, while the Kithara group seemed to be debating something with increasing intensity. Marcus could see that the carefully constructed atmosphere of diplomatic cooperation was beginning to fracture under the pressure of external threat. Admiral Zhang activated her personal communicator. "All human vessels, prepare for immediate departure. Diplomatic Security Protocol 7 is now in effect." But Ragnar had stood and was speaking rapidly to his delegation in their native tongue. Whatever he was saying, it was causing considerable agitation among the other Kithara. Finally, High Packmaster Corvain addressed the room through the translator. "The Zephyrian Empire has learned of these negotiations. They come to stop discussions that they see as threat to their war plans. The Kithara delegation faces difficult choice: return to Zephyrian Alliance or risk designation as traitors to the Empire." The implications of this development were staggering. If the Kithara were seen as traitors by the Zephyrian Empire, they would become targets for elimination. Their participation in these peace talks could doom their entire species to persecution or worse. "You should go," Admiral Zhang said, her voice heavy with disappointment. "We understand the position this puts your people in. Perhaps in the future, when circumstances are different." But Marcus stood up, his mind racing with possibilities. "Wait, there might be another option." All eyes in the room fixed on him as he continued. "The Zephyrians are coming because they want to stop these negotiations. What if we gave them something else to worry about? What if we made this about more than just human-Kithara relations?" Ragnar's ears perked forward with interest. "Explain your meaning, truth speaker." Marcus looked around the room, seeing skepticism and curiosity in equal measure on the faces of both delegations. "The Zephyrian Empire maintains control through fear and the promise of military protection. But what if their subject species saw an example of former enemies choosing cooperation over conflict? What if word spread that peace was possible, that there were alternatives to endless warfare?" Admiral Zhang frowned thoughtfully. "You're talking about something much bigger than a bilateral agreement between humans and Kithara. You're talking about challenging the entire imperial structure." "I'm talking about showing other species that they have choices," Marcus replied. "The Empire's power depends on its allies believing that they have no alternatives. But if the Kithara can break free and forge their own path, others might follow." High Packmaster Corvain was quiet for several moments, clearly weighing the enormous risks involved in such a course of action. When he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of momentous decision. "The true speaker proposes great gamble with stakes higher than any pack has faced before." Yet, he paused, looking at each member of his delegation in turn. Yet honor demands that we consider whether supporting the Empire serves our people, or merely makes us complicit in Empire evil. The Kithara delegation engaged in rapid discussion, their gestural communication flying faster than the translation system could process. Marcus could see that they were debating not just the immediate tactical situation, but the fundamental question of their species' future role in galactic affairs. Finally, Ragnar spoke. The Ninth Fong Pact chooses honor over safety, as we did on the battlefield of Zirian 7. If other pacts choose differently, that is their right. But we will not return to serve masters who would punish us for showing mercy to honorable enemies. And if the Empire brands you as traitors? Admiral Zhang asked. Ragnar's response was translated with simple dignity. Then we will face that fate with honor, knowing that we chose truth over convenience. The sound of approaching ships grew louder, transmitted through the station's hull. They had perhaps 15 minutes before the Zephyrian vessels arrived, demanding explanations and possibly taking hostile action against any who refused to cooperate. Marcus felt the weight of destiny pressing down on him as he realized that the decisions made in the next few minutes could determine the course of galactic history. The simple act of treating a wounded enemy soldier had led to this moment, where former foes stood ready to risk everything for the possibility of a better future. Admiral, he said, turning to Zhang, we need to make a gesture that shows other species what's possible. Something dramatic enough to capture galactic attention, but meaningful enough to demonstrate genuine change. What did you have in mind, Sergeant? Marcus looked at Ragnar, then at the other Kithra delegates. A joint declaration, broadcast on all frequencies, transmitted to every world and station in known space. A statement that humans and Kithra have chosen cooperation over conflict, and that any other species seeking an alternative to imperial domination will find allies ready to support their freedom. The idea was audacious, dangerous, and potentially catastrophic if it failed. It would mark both species as enemies of the Zephyrian Empire, making them targets for retaliation. But it would also serve as a beacon of hope for other oppressed peoples throughout the galaxy. It would mean war with the entire Empire, Admiral Zhang pointed out. We're already at war with the Empire, Marcus replied. The only question is whether we face that war alone, or whether we inspire others to join us in fighting for their own freedom. As the Zephyrian ships grew closer and the moment of decision approached, Marcus realized that everything they had accomplished on Zirian 7, all the trust and understanding built through shared sacrifice, was about to be tested on the grandest possible stage. The battlefield had taught them that former enemies could become allies. Now, they would discover whether that lesson could reshape the galaxy itself.